Hello everyone, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for all the love and support so far. It's been great to see the channel growing, and we're slowly making our way through content that's available on our blog on the website at chiropractic.co.uk. So if you want the references of this data, or if you want to have a read through something in a bit more detail, then feel free to click on the link in the description to find the blog post itself. So today we're going to go through what's the crack, and this is a really important topic for us as chiropractors, because I get asked this a lot by our patients in clinic. So what is the crack? What can I hear? What is it that happens in the joints when you crack somebody's neck? Now, when we're talking about the crack, so I get asked this a lot in clinic. What is the crack? What happens when you manipulate my neck or my back or whatever it is that we're working on? This is a really interesting question, but we're specifically going to be focusing on the synovial joints of the body. Okay, so it's important that we are aware and we are talking about the synovial joints of the body, because we need that fluid, that synovial fluid within the joint margin. This always makes the sacroiliac joint a very interesting area. It is a very, very interesting area of anatomy anyway, and we do have a separate blog post discussing the mechanics of the sacroiliac joint, but only a small fraction of it is actually a synovial joint, and therefore even capable of that cavitation process that we're talking about today. But we're not just talking about obviously the synovial joints, the movable joints of the spine. We are talking about obviously the shoulder, the elbow, the wrists and the fingers, and of course the hip, knee, ankle and toes. This obviously therefore leaves out other joints of the body. So therefore, obviously, we're not going to be talking about the skull. We're not talking about the symphysis pubis. And of course, we're not talking about the sternum when it comes to what we're talking about today. So what is a synovial joint? What do I mean by a synovial joint? Well, a synovial joint is a joint that has a synovial fluid. It has obviously a joint capsular ligament surrounding the joint. So we've got two bones that obviously meet together to make up the joint. We've got the articular cartilage either side on the real distal and proximal ends of those bones just there. So we've got that articular cartilage. We've obviously therefore, of course, we've got the capsular ligaments. We've got the synovial membrane that then houses and obviously keeps the synovial fluid within the joint margin. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about specifically a synovial joint. Other joints of the body are often referred to as a syndesmosis, where we've got two bones that meet at a joint, but there's no articular cartilage in there, or there's no synovial fluid. So of course the joints of the cranial vault are obviously not synovial joints as well. The symphysis pubis is also not a synovial joint. It has a hyaline cartilage, so it doesn't have a synovium, and that's an important distinction for us to be talking about when we're talking about the cavitation process of when we crack a joint. So what do I mean by cavitation? And this is an area that lots of people struggle with when we're talking about the cracking process. So what is a cavitation? Well, basically what a cavitation is, it is a small bubble that forms within the joint when you separate the two surfaces away from one another. So when those two articular surfaces are separated away from one another, we get a rapid change in fluid pressure, and that then causes or leads to the formation of the bubble. Okay, so that's the important distinction. I've heard people talk about on podcasts and things when they're asked this question about what happens when you click a joint, what is that popping sound? And they actually refer to it as being the popping of those bubbles. So the theory therefore is that the bubbles have already formed within the synovium, within the fluid itself, and the chiropractor or the osteopath or whoever's performing the manipulation is popping those bubbles, and that's what makes the popping sound. Now, whilst that makes a more of a logical sense, so obviously thinks yourself, it makes a popping sound, therefore you're popping something. It makes perfectly logical sense, but this is actually a little bit of misinformation. We've known this for quite a long time. I'm going to show you the original research paper published back in the 40s that actually demonstrated that it's the formation of a bubble that causes the popping sound, not the popping of a bubble. The reason why the bubbles form is because we've got obviously certain air products that are within the joint. So we'll have some oxygen, we're going to have some carbon dioxide and things like this that are within the synovial fluid itself. They are obviously dissolved into the fluid, and when you take those two joint surfaces and pull them apart or separate them rapidly, that rapid change in fluid pressure is what forms the bubble. This is exactly the same as what happens when if you ever watch a boat moving along the surface of water. You'll see that you've got normal sort of ripples of water, and past the wake, you've got a load of bubbles that form after the boat has passed over that part of the water, and specifically where the propeller is found. This is an important part of it. You can see the bubbles that get formed after the propeller has moved past you, within the wake of the propeller itself. The bubbles form as a result of that rapid change in fluid pressure. So we've got low pressure on one side of the propeller. Then when we get past the propeller, that fluid pressure rapidly changes, and we're going to get oxygen and hydrogen and things like this that are going to bubble off. Mainly oxygen, by the way, but we're going to have the gases. We're going to have hydrogen, and we're going to have oxygen that then form after the propeller. And it's as a result of that rapid change in fluid pressure that the bubbles form. So in physics, this is called a cavitation. Now, I said to you that this was we found this out originally back in 1947 with this paper published by Roston, cracking in the metacarpal phalangeal joint. This is obviously specifically around the fingers. And what they found are two really, really helpful diagrams or helpful graphs that I've lifted out of the publication itself. Here we have, along the y-axis, we've got the separation of the joint in millimeters, and along the x-axis, we've got tension in kilograms. So as they loaded the joint with more and more tension, as we got just past 8 kilos, that's when the crack happened, and the separation distance of the joint jumped from around 2 millimeters up to just around 4.5, maybe just under 5 millimeters just there. And then, of course, that tension carried on. So the joint can continue to separate to just past 5 millimeters. However, as you can see with the cavitation joint, the line is quite linear and is really quite low, and then suddenly we hit a point where there is a rapid change in the separation distance of the two joint surfaces, and that's where the crack happened. Okay, so that is where that crack took place. It's right when the two joint surfaces separated away from one another. More recently, this one was published in 2015 by Korchuk, and this was Korchuk et al. This is real-time visualization of the joint cavitation process, and this is an interesting one because they actually use an MRI scanner for this particular research design. So as you can see, one of the experimenters, or one of the subjects, had their finger strapped to something that was obviously pulled very slowly, and eventually, obviously, it caused the cavitation to occur. And again, we're still in the metacarpal phalangeal joints. Again, just to stick with the original research that was done back in 1947 as well. And this is the MRI that came out of this particular study. Now you can see here on the reading left, obviously we've got the patient's hand, or the subject's hand, within the MRI scanner, and we're specifically looking at the first, or technically the second, metacarpal phalangeal joint just here. And as they pulled through, as that tension was put on the finger, here's that separation. So here you can see on the right hand side of the screen, here's that joint separation. You can see just how far apart the articular surface is actually separated, and this little dark area just here, that is that cavitation, that is that bubble formation within the joint as a result of separating the two fingers off. So it's not the popping of a bubble that's formed within the joint, it is the formation of that bubble that causes or leads to that popping sound. And again, a couple of helpful diagrams where they basically concluded exactly the same thing as the original paper back in 1947, where again, we've got the joint gap within millimeters here. And as we hit just around sort of 3 millimeters or so, that rapidly shoots up to around 4.5 millimeters. And that's within obviously within the same second, really. So it's within that same second, around 6 seconds that occurred. Okay, so that is where, again, that formation of that bubble occurred within the joints. Okay, and again, this is just to try and tackle that misinformation that's been put out there by a number of other professionals that I've seen on the web, to try and counteract what's actually happening. Because whilst, again, like I said at the start, whilst it makes logical sense that the popping sound is the popping of something, it's actually the other way around. It's the formation of that bubble. And the other question I always get asked in clinical practice is, does cracking your knuckles cause arthritis? Well, the short answer to this is no. Unfortunately not. So any parents out there that whenever they ask me to tell children not to crack their knuckles because it causes arthritis, that was a myth that was disproved many years ago. So unfortunately it does not, like I say, unfortunately, Fortunately, it doesn't cause arthritis, but obviously that myth still exists that clicking your knuckles or cracking your knuckles causes arthritis, and it is actually the opposite. Okay, so just to try and dispel another myth whilst we're in the midst of this video. Thank you so much for watching and so much for listening. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already, and try and help support and boost the channel. It's really, really helpful when you're kind enough to subscribe or like the channel. And yes, I basically, we're going to be going through this. We're going to keep making videos of our blog posts that we've had over the last few years, specifically this year in particular. So keep an eye out on the YouTube channel for more information, or go to our website, spriggschiropractic.co.uk, and click on the blog for more information. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.